Yeah, how's it going, everybody? It's the Masked Man, and even though I've done, obviously, a couple of Berserk videos this year, I haven't really done any going in depth with the narrative of Berserk up to this point. I've sort of kind of talked about, the future of it returning due to the passing of Kentaro Miura, and I did have a video in between chapter 366 and 367 where I wondered what would happen in the events following up to that, but this one is sort of more so looking at the narrative of Berserk as a whole, with the context of the recent chapters, and how I think Berserk is at its largest turning point as a series since the Eclipse. Now, I know that's a very bold statement considering the turning points we had at the beginning of the Millennium Falcon arc, where Griffith is coming back and all the whatnots, but, I think most of us can agree that chapter 368, even though the artwork feels very, very different, and I addressed that already when talking about the chapter, overall, in terms of what 368 had for content, it's one of the strongest Berserk chapters we've gotten for, everything that happens within it. The absolute emotion it was able to invoke within all of us, and I kind of want to lead into the reasonings why. Berserk overall has been a character-driven story, and I think some of my favorite stories of all time can be plot-driven, but when it's a character-driven story, and you have such strong characters like Griffith, Guts, and Casca, simply putting all three of them in the same room instantly creates this level of tension because the entire narrative up to this point has been the action of one leading to the reaction of another. And it's easy to look at these chapters by themselves and see the giant impact that they have, but when you look at the context of the last 10 chapters we've gotten of Berserk, the amount that has transpired has truly been, I think it's one of the strongest stretches throughout the entire series. Little bits of revelation regarding lore with the Berserker armor, the Skull Knight, and there being a God Hand before the God Hand we know as of now, if you will. And I do not think those revelations were done simply to keep us entertained, but if not, they are going to have an influence on the rest of Berserk. And that's why I think me and other content creators, and just other Berserk fans in general, have really been looking at the Skull Knight's motivations and a possible conflict between him and Guts, but that's a topic for another time. And so yes, even though there has been new information added to the context behind the forces behind the world of Berserk, I don't know if that was the best structured sentence, but just roll with it. The real reason why I think it's at a huge narrative turning point is because of what's happened with our three primary characters. Again, which is why in the beginning I said this is a character-driven story at the end of the day. First, I want to kind of get Griffith out of the way. I know that maybe some weren't a big fan of the little dialogue that we had in this moment or in this scene, but yet I think that truly fits with who Griffith is. Going back to the Golden Age arc, one of the things that made Griffith so intriguing is that we never really got to know how he felt on the inside. We simply got his reactions to certain things and what other characters said about Griffith. It was very few moments far in between where we saw Griffith really open up himself to Guts, and then later on when he's captured and in prison and in torture, then is where we get more of how he thinks. But even throughout then, up until the Eclipse, until we get a scene where Griffith is thinking about sacrificing the Band of the Hawk, truly his motives and his feelings are still up for debate to this day. Now, one thing that is made very clear within the Golden Age arc, however, with Griffith, is his goal, his motivation. That he's very clear with, and that continues throughout the rest of Berserk. I bring all that up because we don't really get Griffith saying anything to Guts at all. He simply just goes for Casca, takes her, and leaves. And so his motivations and his goals for taking Casca, I think leaving that in the air as much as possible truly continues that intrigue with Griffith as a character and what will happen next in Berserk. And this leads into the next primary character, Casca. Now, Real Life Ryan did a video discussing this, and I did a tweet regarding this, but I understand that having Casca in the state that she was in for a large majority of Berserk's narrative, her getting her mind back, and now her getting taken by Griffith, I know that some people see that as, oh, she's being the damsel in distress, but let's look at things in its proper context here. Now, the reason why I have an issue with people complaining about this sort of thing is because let's imagine if Casca did do something. She fought against Griffith, she resisted, whatever it was. Do you mean to tell me that Casca has a complete mental breakdown when looking at Guts because it reminds her of all of those things, but yet she should be able to retaliate against the aggressor, the one who inflicted said PTSD upon her? I don't think it would have been an accurate portrayal of trauma at all, and I think it would have been a little preposterous, if not ridiculous, to expect her to do anything to Griffith when Guts himself was incapable of doing so. I know that we all love Casca for how, you know, strong she is, quote-unquote, but there's so much more to her character than just strong female character who can fight. But in this latter half of Berserk, she has been nothing but the clear demonstration of what dealing with trauma is like, and so expecting her to sort of do anything in this scenario, again, I find it to be a bit ridiculous. Although, again, I can understand the frustration, but I think that frustration is the point, as that's the same frustration that I imagine Guts has, if anything. And so it simply just plays on the tragedy that we've gone through all of this just for Griffith to take it away again. Plus, I don't think Casca's going to remain in that state forever. Think about it, now she has to be face to face with the main cause of her trauma, and we have to see her character either break again, which I highly doubt since that's what we've just went through, or we have to see her overcome that. Again, Casca's character, her character arc, if you will, is not finished. And so we have more to see with Casca's character, and now she is in the ultimate state of tension, being close to the man that did all of these things to her in the first place. So again, just like with Griffith and not knowing his intentions, now having Casca this close to Griffith, I think it instantly puts the narrative of Berserk at a huge turning point. Now, there's one more character we haven't addressed, and there's a reason I saved him for last. Because even though, yes, the narrative of Berserk is about the conflict between Guts and Griffith, and yes, Casca is a highly important character, these two characters at the end of the day in the narrative of Berserk serve to push and pull Guts. The reason why I have even more of an issue with the whole Casca damsel in distress, wanting her to do something, not only because I don't think it really makes sense for her character, it's because we need to look at Guts and everything that this means for him. When Guts was at his worst as a person, when he was going out as the Black Swordsman, going nuts on vengeance, who was absent in his life? Casca. When he was at his happiest, the most fulfilled, when Berserk was at its brightest as a story, who was Guts with? Casca. When Guts went and realized that his revenge was leading him down a road of destruction, who was the new focus of his attention that brought him to grow more as a person and move a bit away from his vengeance? Casca. I think you get the point. The most important person to Guts, outside of Griffith for other reasons, and this is why I said it was important in my recent chapter reviews that we need to take all these chapters within their context, and why many times I repeated, I think Guts is at a huge crossroads as a character, a huge turning point as a character. Because again, not only with all of the context we've gotten with some revelations with the God Hand, the Skull Knight, the Berserker armor, but the most important thing that has moved Guts as a character for better or for worse is Casca. And he's wondering what he would have done now, or what was he to do now if Casca was okay and safe. And again, this is why I said at the beginning, this is a character-driven story. With Griffith taking Casca away, this now forces us and our attention to Guts' reaction to that event. And with Casca being the most important thing to him, the most important person to him, correction, what will he do now, knowing how this has gone before, with new context added? And I think that with Shirke and Farnese and the rest of the group around, and I think also the Skull Knight being present, I think that they will have to do their best in order to pull Guts out of whatever darkness he's about to be thrown into. There have been two videos I've seen regarding Guts and the use of his Bailet, one done by Tranquil Dionysian, who's done like the big Berserk timeline and everything like that, and he went into that topic in depth. So if you're interested in that, go check out that video, as well as another video done like a month ago by Mugen. So I won't get into that too much, but again, now we are at that point where Guts has nothing to lose. He has every right, if anything now, to resort to those methods. And even though, again, that's why I think the context of his party being there to pull him out of that, I truly believe that there's just so much up in the air regarding Berserk, not just because of all of the context and changes with the world, but because of the turning points within its three primary characters: Griffith, Casca, and Guts. Griffith is slowly adding to his list of enemies more and more, and I think one of his biggest mistakes, the fall to his kingdom, will be having Casca this close to him. I think the current staff in charge of Berserk and Koji Mori have an incredibly difficult task ahead of them, but I also think they have the best tools possible, as they have 3 of the strongest characters in manga that are so interconnected that one is simply immersed by their presence. We've seen almost the entire ins and outs of Guts as a character, which is why 368, so many of us felt just as much despair as he did, because we've been thrown into his shoes throughout this entire story. And seeing Guts' reaction go from anger to pure desperation and tints of sadness was one of the most heartbreaking things to read throughout the entire story so far. And it's really funny to see that people were complaining about Casca being in such a helpless state, but yet I would argue Guts in that scenario was also just as helpless as she was. Guts once again was just as helpless as he was in the Eclipse, which is why I think Berserk is at its largest turning point.